Good morning. Hey, Serena. Nice to see you. I don't know if you all noted, but I've got five of my Burns family here: Claudia, Laura, Buster, Jared, and Jody. Um, they told me they wanted to come hear a bad sermon, and so they honor me by their presence. I've titled this talk, The Pedestrian Jesus. The word pedestrian is defined as boring, slow, stupid, dry, annoying, monotonous, humdrum, along with dreary and stodgy. But I find myself drawn to its original meaning from the word pedester. Pedester simply means going on foot. In this passage, the Jesus we know walked by foot. He shared the Beatitudes in such a way that at the end of chapter 7 it says, quote, "The crowds were amazed at his teaching because he taught as one who had authority and not as their teachers of the law." The audience could sense the authenticity of Jesus. They could sense his integrity, his sincerity. They could sense Jesus' ability to speak to their deepest needs, even if they did not know the extent of their needs. They sensed that Jesus could pedester in their shoes. No sense of arrogance, no sense of superior ego, no sense of competition, and in light of the first verses of chapter 7, no sense of judgment. Jesus pedestrian with the Samaritan woman at the well in John chapter 4. She perceived Jesus as different in religion, as different in politics, and I think on a very deep level, she sensed Jesus as very judgmental of her having 5 husbands, along with the man with whom she was presently shacking up with. What does Jesus do? He engages her. He accepts her. He challenges her to consider that redemption is as much for her as for anyone else. And he doesn't become defensive when she attacks. Slowly, over time, she relents. And when she is felt seen by Jesus, she went and told the very people who used to shun her because of her lifestyle. And that is what happens when you walk in someone else's shoes. They become pedestrian themselves. Or take Mark chapter 5, verses 25 through 34. A woman whose continual bleeding meant that she was ostracized because she was ritually unclean. Jesus pedesters among the crowd, everyone touching him, jostling him back and forth, everyone trying to get a piece of him as if he was a superstar in the movies. But there was this one woman, a woman desperate for healing, desperate for community. She figures if she could but touch the hem of his garment, she could be healed. And so she goes for it. She has to amble around so many people. Maybe she even got close only to be jostled away. Frustration sets in, but also resolve. Closer, closer, closer. And maybe as she's falling, she touches the hem of Jesus' garment. And Jesus just stops. Who touched me? He asks. People share that so many people were touching Jesus, but Jesus knows that power has gone out from him into someone else. and it becomes quiet. The woman, now aware of the immediacy of her healing, maybe her face felt flushed when Jesus asked, "Who touched me?" Maybe she felt that all the eyes were on her, even though many knew not her struggle. And so, with fear, with trembling, she goes up and she says, "It was me." And Jesus said that her faith was what healed her. He told her to go in peace, to be free from her suffering. Without Jesus having pedestrian in that moment, her life would have remained on the margins. Her life would have remained on the outside looking in. But Jesus pedestrians among those who are on the margins, that they may experience God intimately and that they may walk away with a deep sense of God's shalom and God's freedom. And so we note that Jesus pedestrians among the crowd of Matthew chapter 7, 5 verses 7, in the Sermon on the Mount. He pedestrians with a marginalized woman in John chapter 4, so much so that the woman, herself changed, is no longer bound by the marginality of life. She goes to the very people who had marginalized her and shared the gift that she had received from Jesus. And Jesus pedestrianed with the woman whose bleeding could not stop. Yep, he displayed his pedestrian nature with both crowds and individuals, and he pedestrianed with death. I was talking to Cynthia right before church today, and we were joking about her doing my funeral. And we both said that we're comfortable talking about death. Not so in our society. In the book of John, chapter 11, we see Jesus suffering with Martha and Mary in the death of their brother Lazarus. So much so that Jesus himself is overcome with death, with grief. Jesus cries. He hurts not just for Martha and Mary, but he hurts with Martha and Mary. He enters the cave where Lazarus is buried. He offers prayer to the Father with confidence. And then he orders Lazarus to come forth. And Lazarus does just that. He comes forth. The disciples are stunned. Lazarus' siblings are stunned. All those gathered are stunned. But not everyone. And it's always that way. Not everyone will get Jesus' capacity to be pedestrian among humanity. Recently, two experiences have brought home to me this idea of being pedestrian in the manner of Jesus. And both happened in the context of Burns Tavern, the bar that I frequent on occasion. And I do want you to know that I frequent it on occasion because I now live at 11 Shore Trail in North Stamford. When I was a mile from there, I went there every night. Now I go 2 or 3 days a week. So I frequent it on occasion. The first Wednesday following Cynthia's and Cale's arrival to Stamford, I invited them to join me at Burns after Bible class. We drove to Burns. We arrived around 8:30. As we enter, there's a small crowd. I know most of the patrons. I begin introducing Cynthia and Cale. And as I'm going up to the last person to introduce to our new minister and to Cale, Joey knows that I bring a lot of people to Burns. So I'm going to quote Joey without quoting Joey. Laconia, who in the blankety blank blank did you bring this time? You can fill in blankety blank blank, all curse words. My response, Joey, I would like to introduce you to my new minister and her husband. Joey's face turned beet red and he apologized profusely. But here's the spiritually pedestrian act of Cynthia. She went straight up to Joey, shook his hand, and offered that she's heard all those words before and that it was no big deal. In that moment, light occurred for Joey. In that moment, light occurred for me. No judgment, no sense of harsh criticism or vilification. Instead, the evening continued with a deep sense of conviviality and friendship, and indeed, we were just fellow human beings enjoying one another. And for me, that was a Jesus moment. Second, this past Thursday, I was at Burns and I got home and Kathy was upstairs and I went upstairs and I said, Kathy, I just got to tell you this story. I was at Burns this past Thursday and again, a small crowd. Another regular named Mikey enters with a friend. Mikey introduces his friend to a few who were gathered. But Mikey seems to have missed introducing his friend to me. So I just turned around, introduced myself as Laconia Therrio, and Mikey's friend just stops in his tracks. He looks at me. I look at him. He remembers me. I remember him. But no words were spoken. 3 years ago, Mikey, along with a number of people at Burns, told me about a friend of theirs whose wife was in the ICU from a motorcycle accident. The wife had suffered a head injury. It was just a quick ride, and she decided to go without a helmet. So before I'd even met this man, I went to the hospital. Mike and others had asked me to visit him along with his wife. And for the next maybe 2 months, I would check in on this man and his family, and he slept every night at the hospital with his wife. Eventually, the family made the decision to allow their wife and mother to pass, as there was nothing for her to do but live by machine. And here's the part where I believe it's similar to the Samaritan woman, the woman who bled profusely, and Mary, Martha, and those who'd gathered to support Lazarus' family. The man who lost his wife said this to me, I quote, "You know, I could not have picked you out of a crowd, but I remember you being there for me and being there for my family. I don't remember your face, but what I do remember is your essence." He was apologetic for not remembering my face, and I shared that what was important is that he and his family received what they got, the essence of God's Spirit in the most tragic of circumstances. He stood up, he started crying, he opened his arms, and we held one another for, I'm guessing, 1 minute. I believe on a deep level that what actually occurred was that I had pedestrianed with him and his family, that indeed they allowed me as a chaplain to pedestre with them as a family. Not many words, but just a sense of presence, a sense of walking with them in their journey. That is what Jesus did with the Samaritan woman. That is what Jesus did with the woman who suffered from bleeding. And that is what Jesus did with those grieving with the family of Lazarus. The call this morning is to embrace your capacity and my capacity to pedestal with those who come into our lives. The call is to live in such a way that people feel seen, feel felt, feel heard, and most of all, feel loved. The call is to live in such a way that people will recognize our authority as genuine, real, and God-breathed. None of us are Jesus, and yet on a deep level, we are. Because for some people, we are the only Jesus they'll ever know. In that way, people will experience the essence of God through your life, through my life, to God's glory. May it be so.